We're looking at, starting this morning, just at a short series on the church, looking at three particular titles: loving the church, the bride of Christ; loving the church, the body of Christ; loving the church, the building of Christ. And as I was sitting here and I was worshipping with you this morning, there was a fourth one came to me, and I'm not sure whether I'll include it and we do it, stretch it out or what, but it's loving the church, the battlefield. And there's some things that we could say around that to help us understand the church. So we're starting today with falling in love with the bride of Christ. And that's not the bride, but a 40-plus kg Labrador retriever named Marley is claimed to be the world's worst dog. He crashed through screen doors with alarming regularity. He went berserk during thunderstorms, destroying everything in his path. He stole food off the dinner table, slobbered incessantly, drank from the toilet bowl, and ate bath towels, sponges, socks, used tissues, plastic toys, furniture, speaker covers, paychecks, even an expensive gold necklace. He was incorrigible, but utterly lovable. The question could ask, how could a master love a dog that had so many bad qualities? The reality is that every dog that has a master, no matter how bad the qualities, also has a whole heap of lovable qualities about it. And that's why the master hangs in with it. It's said that a dog is a man's best friend. I had a dog once, a black cocker spaniel. His name was Punch. He was my best friend. Whenever I was down, I knew I could go to Punch and I could sit down there and he'd wag his tail as me as a child would just pour out my broken heart to this adorable cocker spaniel. And if you know cocker spaniels, they have those sort of black, or this was a black one, they have those droopy ears and those eyes that they just look at you and you just sort of feel you're hearing, you're understanding every word that I'm saying. And my heart would just go out more and more to this dog. Well, we had Dad at that time had our vehicle was what was an A40 Austin pickup, it was probably one of the original utes. It was a pretty small thing. Dad put a canopy on the back so all us kids could get in the back if we went anywhere. And he and Mum had the comfort of the front seats in the cab. So when we were in the back, it was great because Punch could come with us. And we were living in the outskirts of Huntly at a place called Glen Afton, about just a few kilometres out of Huntly. It was a mining town, and Dad was working on the railways there, and so we would occasionally go from Glen Afton into Huntly to do our shopping or for something special. On the way home, there was a dairy that had the best ice creams in town, and Dad, if he was feeling in a really generous mood, would stop and he would buy us an ice cream. So we'd all be sitting in the back with my dog in the back of the ute, ready to drive home. But I love my dog, and I just knew that my dog loved me. And I just knew that he wouldn't like me to have this whole ice cream without me sharing it with him. So it was lick for lick. You have a lick, Punch, and I'll have a lick. But make sure that your lick is not bigger than my lick. And there's this bond, this relationship that we had together. What does that have to do with the bride of Christ and with the church? It's everything to do with a bond that we have and a relationship that we can build. The church is the same as this master and the dog. Our master is Jesus. We're the bride. We're going to come back to now the true story of what we want to talk about, of being the bride of Christ. And he has prepared us. And this is a beautiful illustration of this wonderful relationship that we have. And I guess if a girl can't look pretty on her wedding day, I doubt that she'll ever look pretty at any point. You know, it's sort of like every effort goes into making sure that she is the most adorable, attractive, pretty, however you want to describe it, creature that was on the face of the earth on that day. And she is, at least for one person. But everyone usually stops in awe as they look at the bride. But you just think of as this bride comes into the church and she's walking down the aisle, and everybody's looking at her. And all of a sudden somebody starts picking holes and, oh, I don't like that dress. Oh, she's got her makeup a bit twisted, hasn't she? What are those shoes? Where did she get those? They must have been number one shoes. And all of a sudden we're picking holes in the bride as she comes down the aisle, and she starts to pick this up. She starts to hear what people are actually saying. And all of a sudden it gets too much for her. She turns and runs out. She thinks, this isn't for me. This beautiful bride, this beautiful person. And we say, well, that wouldn't happen. And I don't know, I've never heard of it happening. And please God, never let it happen. But when we're thinking about the church as the bride, isn't that often what happens? I've been in the church now for 68 years. That's a fair while. I think I wasn't born in the church, but it wasn't long after I was born I was in church. I guess the number of days in which I've been, Sundays which I haven't been at church in that time is rare. There have been some, obviously, but in terms of the number that we've been there and the number that we've been taken and some number that we've had to go when we didn't want to go, the number that I've wanted to be there far, far, far exceed the number that I would have been away. In fact, if I'm away from church, I really start to struggle. I miss it. It's just, I might be doing something else on the Sunday, and all of a sudden it's sort of like, this doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel right. I don't enjoy this because I want to be where my friends are. But amidst all of that, there have been the pain parts that the church comes, and we're an interesting breed of people called the church. It's an interesting combination of people that Jesus brings together and says, this is my bride. And when we look around our room here, we find we're a whole mixture of people. We've got young people and old people. We've got different coloured hair, different shapes, different backgrounds, different theological perspectives. We're a whole conglomeration of people that he has brought together and said, I want you to be one in this unity of being the bride. And yet in the midst of that oneness, as we rub shoulders, we're a bit like porcupines, we poke each other. And we hurt each other. And life gets uncomfortable. And I could write a book probably on the stuff that we've experienced in church and through the church that would make horrible reading. But I want to tell you on the other side of the ledger, there have just been so many times when we have been so blessed and so encouraged and so nurtured and so supported and so loved and so felt like we are in this group, and that there are people who care that far outweigh all of the pain that might be afflicted on us as we journey in this group called the bride. And today I want to share with you something of why I believe, or why I love this thing called the church. And I'm not talking about here, when I'm talking about the church now, just individual believers. I'm talking about us as a body, the church as a unit, the whole group called the church. This is what I love. I hope you love it if you're a part of it. It's made up of individuals, but it's made up of us as a whole group as well. I want us to look beyond the warts and the wrinkles and beyond the problems and beyond the frustrations and see the church perhaps as Jesus sees it. And he sees it, I think, from quite a different perspective than what we do. Kevin Harney, in that book which Rion was quoting from, says that every church has its problems and challenges, but I believe the church is still the beautiful and mysterious bride of Christ. I am confident that our Saviour sees the church as it really is, warts and all, and yet still loves his bride. I'm growing more convinced as the years pass that the church is far more beautiful and wonderful than we ever know. And I would say amen to that, Kevin. I think it is one of the most beautiful things on the face of the earth because of what Christ has done for it. There are many people, Christians and non-Christians, who don't love the church, who don't love this bride. There are Christians who don't love it as much as they should or could, and they show it by rarely attending and rarely giving and rarely doing any real work for the church. We can say we love the church, but if we love the church, the bride of Christ, we must show it also in the way in which we act towards it. Now, I'm here today to tell you that I love this church, and I love the church that Jesus brought with his blood, and I hope you do too. In my office, I have a little thing up on my wall that says, "Your vision of Christ will determine your vision of the church." Your vision of Christ will determine your vision of the church. And your vision of the church will demonstrate your vision of Christ. Did you get that? Your vision of Christ will determine your vision of the church. What you see and think of Christ is what you think of the church. And what you think of the church and your vision of the church will demonstrate your vision of Christ. You see, we can't say that we love the church, we love the bride, and then kick her around. Can't do that. In the secular world, when you do that, it's called abuse. Violent abuse, where a husband kicks the bride around. We won't tolerate it. The world won't tolerate it. The courts won't tolerate it. And yet, how sadly, within the church, we will. We will tolerate the abuse, the kicking around. I want us to read together Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, after all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. He says husbands are to love their wives just as Christ loved the church. He has given us this example of how Christ, the husband, has loved this church, his bride. And he's saying to us as husbands, that's how I want you to love your wife. He's taking this beautiful picture and he's saying Jesus is wanting to take this bride, this beautiful creature that he's creating, and present her holy, blameless, faultless, without blemish, no faults, pure. And this is his picture of what he's wanting to take of us as a group and present us to the Father and say, this is my bride. Isn't she gorgeous? Isn't she a beauty? Because she's without stain, she's without wrinkle, she's without spot, she's without blemish. And then he says, just as a husband is to care for his wife, just as Christ does the church. We're going to come to that point a little bit later on. Then he says that this is a profound mystery, this relationship of husband and wife. He said it's a profound mystery, but he's saying, but I am talking about Christ and the church. This is the mystery. How is it that we are united with Christ in this unique, fantastic relationship of bride and bridegroom? Well, I want to share with you that I love the church because Christ loves the church. And when we love someone, we tend to love the things that they love. That's why heirlooms are really important. You see an heirloom and you think this is precious because of what it means and what it signifies. And I brought an heirloom. If we had a decent pulpit, I could put it on a decent pulpit, but we haven't, so I won't. But this is a family heirloom. When I saw it at my father's one day, and everyone was sort of starting to tag stuff, and saying, "Hey, Dad, can I have that?" And Mum, "Can I have that?" And my sister was good at putting her name on things and stuff. And I saw this. The cover was broken off it. It was sort of tucked away. And I said, "Dad, I want that. Can I have that? I don't care that it's broken. I just want it because it's so precious." Inside there is an inscription written in it. Put a whole lot of other stuff in it as well here, all clippings and all that. But it says, "This Bible was given to brother and sister Embling by the officers and soldiers of the Eltham Salvation Army Corps, New Zealand, on their wedding day on the 7th of September, 1905. You see, what has made this heirloom so precious to me is that for 100 years, at least over 100 years, we've had this tremendous heritage of being in the bride of Christ. My grandparents loved Jesus. And I don't know whether you would value something like that being given to you on your wedding day. But they did. They kept it. They lived by it. My father lived by it. He loved it. We've received it. We've passed it on to our children. So for 5 or 6 generations that we know of, this heirloom has been significant. Not because of just being a Bible, but because of the heritage that it brings and shows us that we've had this unique relationship with the bride of Christ. One of the reasons why I love the church is because Jesus demonstrated that love by what he did for us. In John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, he said, "A new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another." What is one of the key elements that you see in a relationship between a bride and a bridegroom? It's the love they have for one another, the way they look into each other's eyes. There's a sparkle, there's an anticipation, there's a joy. Trust it doesn't go after 44 years. She's still the most beautiful bride. Don't take everything Rion says as true. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, obviously. But he says, this is a new commandment I give you, to love one another. And when the world sees this bride in love with each other, he said, then they'll know that they're in love with the groom, that they love the groom because they're getting on so well here. It's an interesting picture, isn't it? You see, the only way they know that we love the groom is by the fact that we love one another. And he says it's not new in the fact that this commandment hadn't been around before. It's new in terms of its intensity and its depth. That we are to love as Christ has loved us. I love him because he gave himself up for it. You see, he gave up all his rights. He gave up his position in the kingdom, in heaven, in order to become a baby, to become a servant, to die as a man. He suffered at the hands of his own creation in order that he might be able to have a bride. I don't know anybody that has done that, because if they did, they probably wouldn't be here. They wouldn't be a groom to stand at the altar with their bride. But Jesus, because he was God and was able to rise again, he was able to come and say, I've died for you and I've redeemed you and I'm coming back for you. Ephesians 5:25, we read it, said that husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. You see, I love it because it's not our idea. It's Christ's idea. It was his plan right from the very beginning that we might be his bride. And Jesus loved us so much that he was willing to give himself up for us. When God asks us to love the church, warts and all, he's not asking us to do something that he hasn't been willing to do. I was reading recently in a book called The Outward Focused Life by David Workman, and he gives this illustration. He said, imagine the soundtrack from Moulin Rouge playing in the background and a voice saying, there was a man who loved a woman deeply. The woman was a prostitute. There have been many reams of reasons why she sold her body to men to do what they would, but her soul had shrunk to a size so small she could not hear it cry. She could hear only a faint whisper from time to time. But the man who loved this woman was mesmerized not by what she was, but by what she could be. Not by how she lived, but how she could live. Not by the layers of makeup that now painted her worn face, but by a beauty marred like a coin, handled too many times, pocketed too much, and spent too easily. He loved her. No, he was intoxicated by her. Why? Because he was married to her. He married her when she was a prostitute. She'd given him 2 sons and a daughter. And years later, when she had left him again, he travelled to the street corner where she sold herself each evening. Men knew who he was. They grinned and made jokes about his manhood. And in front of them all, he paid her pimp some money and to have her. The thugs in the alley laughed. What kind of husband had such little self-respect and so few prospects, and was so pathetically romantic that he could not see what she was? But he knew exactly what she was. Though she was bathed in the mercury vapor streetlight with her head hung in shame and her long curls hiding her eyes from his gaze, he knew deeply who she was. She was his wife. And these other men, these jackals, would never know her like that. Never. Because they had never known the glory of true love. So he took her home again. Would you love that bride? Would you take that bride, guys? Would you take that bride back into your home? See, he's relating the story of Hosea and Gomer. Many of you recognize that. And Jesus God was saying in that story, this is my relationship with you. You have failed me often. You have prostituted yourself often against me. You've walked away from me, but he's saying, my arms are always open to receive you. You are my wife. You are my bride, and I love you, and I will not let you go. You are precious to me. And I can look deeper than the makeup, and I can look deeper than the scars of life that are showing on your face, and I love you. And that's how he responds to us. And I love him because he takes care of the church. Not only does God promise to provide for our physical bodies, he also promises to nourish and take care of those that make up the church spiritually. Verse 29 of Ephesians 5 that we read, he said, after all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and nurture and take care of their body, just as Christ does the church. He cares for us, he nurtures us, he looks after us. How often do we turn on our TV news and we hear the story of some child that has been abused and taken to Starship Hospital with unexplained injuries, and later discover that it was because the poor child had suffered some violence in the home. Even just this last week, another child died at the hands of somebody in the home. We say, how can people do that to their own? Surely if they love them, they're meant to care for them and nurture them and watch over them. And Jesus is saying, and that's what I want to do for you, my bride. I don't want to abuse you. I don't want to frustrate you. I don't want to make life unreasonable for you. I want to nurture you. I want to care for you. I want to feed you. I want to love you. I want to watch over you. I want to protect you. That's his passion for his bride. The church is dependent on him doing that. One of the ways in which he does care for us is he gives us each other to watch over us, to help us, so that those who come alongside us when we're struggling and when we're weak and when we're down and they can lift us up. And when we're buoyant and when we're feeling strong, we can come along somebody who is weak and who is struggling. And he's brought us together in this amazing body called the bride and saying, this is the way you love each other. You watch out for each other. He's given us gifts so that we can use those gifts to care for one another. In Ephesians 4, the latter part of that chapter, he's saying, I've given you apostles and prophets and teachers and evangelists and pastors for the purpose of building you up. And then in verse 16 he says that when you're all doing this, the church will build itself up in love as each part is doing its work, as each part is contributing, as each part is looking out for the other part and not wanting to push it down, not wanting to kick it down, not wanting to abuse it, but to love it and to nurture it and care for it and to see that it starts to reflect something, the holiness and the beauty and the love of Jesus. I love the church because when the church hurts, he hurts. He feels the pain of a hurting church. When we do it to the church and when others do it to us, he feels that pain. And Christ hurts when his people hurt. God has always taken it personally when his people have been mistreated or when they are hurt. And when they were in slavery in Egypt, God felt that pain. And for 400 years he felt that pain until he sent Moses along to liberate them and to free them and to take them out of slavery and give them a new land and a new hope and a new future. But that nation even then started to wander away and prostituted themselves to other gods and other idols. But he felt that pain. When we come into the New Testament and we see the Apostle Paul, or he wasn't the Apostle Paul, he was Saul of Tarsus, the Pharisee, going from Jerusalem to Damascus with fire in his belly to exterminate this thing called the church, the way, this new thing which had risen up under a leader called Jesus. And he's going on this journey, and all of a sudden the sky comes so bright, he's blinded by the sun. And he hears the voice of Jesus saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Why did Jesus say me? Paul could have said, Saul then could have said, I'm not persecuting you. It's these rebels over here who are causing so much trouble and they're not holding to the faith. They're doing all this wrong stuff. But Jesus said, Saul, you're persecuting me. I feel the pain. When you take one of these people, these men, one of these women, one of these children, and you lock them up in prison because they're worshipping me, I feel that pain. I feel their chains. And when you have them executed, I feel their death. He feels the pain. And when others inflict pain on us, when the world doesn't understand where the church is at, and they start persecuting the church, and across this world there are nations where the church is so severely persecuted, and friends, Jesus feels that pain. And when he sees us, when we might be biting each other and backbiting and hurting each other, I'm sorry. When he sees that, he feels. I love the church because we're part of this big family. I love that song. I don't know that we sing it here, but that happened, I think, we've been here. It's an old one, so it probably wouldn't quite fit. But I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. I'm washed in the fountain, cleansed by his blood. Joint heirs with Jesus as we travel this road. I'm part of the family of God. You'll notice we say brother and sister around here. If you're just new to the church, you haven't been around us before, you might hear that comment. People call each other brother or sister. Great. It's because we're a family and these folks are so dear. When one has a heartache, we all share the tears and rejoice in each victory in this family so dear. See, there's no greater family. This is our family. And for some, it's more of a family than we would ever know. Some of us have had the privilege of being brought up in a home where this was so valued and treasured, became part of our life. We knew what it was to have a loving mum and a loving dad who would care for us and teach us about Jesus. But some haven't had that privilege. You probably still got parents who don't know Jesus, brothers and sisters who don't know Jesus. You probably think you're a bit weird because you do. And you think this is your spiritual family. This is where you get that love and understanding, that special relationship that you wouldn't otherwise get. And I think in the church we should guard each other in the same way as we would guard our families. I grew up with 2 older brothers and 1 younger sister. And my oldest brother wasn't 4 when my sister was born. So Mum had her hands full. And so we're pretty close in age. And as we grew up, I had quite, as a child, a young person, I had quite a fiery temper. I could ignite that. It could ignite pretty quickly. I think God's done some work over the years on that. It doesn't fire up quite as quickly as it used to. And I can remember having a fight with my oldest brother one day, and I picked up the fire shovel and I hit him across the face with it, broke a tooth. I came out second best because what Mum did to me doesn't compare with what I did to him, even though that was pretty bad. She made sure I understood the cost of that. But I can tell you what, because we all went to the same school, if ever anybody picked on one of us, they picked on the 4 of us. And we were tight. And there was a time in that same village in Glenafton where we were going to this little primary school out at Pukamiro, and we were bits of outcasts because we were different and a whole lot of stuff. And there was a bit of a thing against us. I tell you, we were tight on the playfield. And that's what he wants us to do. He wants us to be tight. He wants us to be protecting each other, to be watching after each other. When one of the church sins, it isn't the best response to go and tell everybody in the community about that person's sin. We wouldn't do it in the family. You don't want to broadcast to the community what is not right or going wrong within the family. Some things simply have to stay in the family. We're not perfect. We've come here thinking church is perfect. It's not. You hang around long enough and you'll discover that, painfully sometimes. But Paul said to the Galatians in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 1, he said, "Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly, you who are spiritual, should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path." That's a different approach to what we take sometimes, isn't it? We take, they've sinned, so I'm going to kick them while they're down. I'm going to abuse them. I'm going to rubbish them. I'm going to tell them exactly what I think. You do that and you're breaking Scripture. You're breaking the heart of Jesus because you are hurting his bride. And he goes on to say, "But be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. So easy to do the negative. So hard. You see, if you're spiritual, if you are spirit-filled, if you're in love with Jesus and in love with his bride, you'll be the right person to come along, somebody who is struggling, somebody who has perhaps made some mistakes, and come alongside them and try to win them back. Being part of a good family is what it was all about. I love the church because of the strong relationships that we can find within it. The church is unlike anything else in the whole world, and that special relationships can be formed between those who have a common bond in the church. There's something about our relationship when we come to Christ that cannot be compared to any other relationship. And we often wonder why. Now, why do you people keep coming back here every Sunday with the same group of people? Week after week, month after month, year after year. If it's not because you don't love the bride and you don't love the family and you're not in good relationships with the family. I read about the giant redwood trees in California. And they actually have shallow roots, and yet they grow to 30 or 40 meters plus. So why is it these giant redwoods don't blow over even in the slightest breeze? What is it that holds them together? Well, when you look under the surface, although their roots are shallow, all their roots are intertwined with each other. So each tree is helping the other to stand and to be stable. So if you're going to blow one over, you've got to blow the whole forest over, because they're all sort of tucked in together. They're bound together. And he said Jesus is really saying that's what happens in our relationships together. We are so bound together that nothing will blow us over. Nothing's going to distract us. Nothing's going to take us off course because of this relationship that we have. As Christians, we are rooted together in Christ, and we're able then to withstand all of life's difficulties because of this relationship that we have together. Peter said in Peter chapter 3 and verse 38, "Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, and tender heart, and a humble mind." In Ephesians 4 and verse 3, Paul is encouraging the Ephesians to strive to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Psalm 133 is telling us that where there is a spirit of unity amongst God's children, there God will command a blessing. Unity is a magnificent thing, and it's a key factor in the blessing of God upon us. So how do we pull all this together? How do we develop this love relationship for the church? Well, first of all, know what the church is, and that's what we're going to try and talk about. We've seen something today of the bride, this beautiful creature that Christ is bringing together without spot, blemish, wrinkle, anything like that. And he's wanting to mature us into that relationship. You start by looking at the book of Acts and see what was happening in the early church. You'll see how they demonstrated some of this. Then if you look at the letters of the New Testament that Paul and Peter and John wrote to and James wrote to the early church, you'll see that they were showing us how we can love each other in the midst of difficulties. Each letter was written because there was a crisis in the church. There was a problem in the church. And each letter was answering that. So right back at the very beginning, they had issues. But he's saying this is how you can live through those. How did they relate to each other? What was their message? Commit to always speak well of the church. We had an agreement in the Ministers Association in Tauranga that we would always speak well of each other, and we would always speak well to each other. So if we were in a group of people and we heard people talking about another person and rubbishing them and criticizing them severely, we'd say, hey, we don't do that around here. It's not what we do. And if it was talking about another church, we'd say, no, hang on, we don't talk about other Christians like that. We don't talk about other churches like that. We're one. We do things different. That's why there's so many different denominations around. About 45,000 at least around the world. That's a lot of denominations. And we're not all the same. We all do things differently. But where the Word of God is preached and where Christ is honoured and loved and where there's a heart to win people to Christ, that's the important issue that we should be striving towards. Pray more and criticise less. R.A. Torrey calls Christians to be honest about the frailties that they see in the church, but then to pray about them. He said, if you don't like the pastor's sermons, pray until the sermons become great. There you go. We're all broken people needing healing and forgiveness. Let us love on people, I heard somebody say recently. It's sort of an interesting phrase, love on people, but I think you get the picture. Let's lavish love on each other and not be so quick to criticise and to rubbish. Is there someone that you can invite to church? Is there somebody that you know is just starting to come? They're starting on the fringe and they're asking about Jesus. Could you invite them to come? Would they be free to come? What your friends need more than anything else is what we've found in the church in terms of our relationship with Jesus. And then take a look in the mirror. All the church's problems begin with us. See, everywhere I go, I take me with me. All my hang-ups, all my hassles, all my background, everything that I am. Now, I might not like what happens in a church sometimes, and I might not like happens between people, but if I say I'm going to leave that, then I still take me with me, with my own hassles and my own difficulties and my own frustrations, my own thinking about how things should happen and way things should do, what things should do. That's who I am. And the scriptures tell us, really, before you take the tweezers to pull the splinter out of someone else's eye, remember that you've probably got a plank in your own. As we start to put some of this together, we might start to see that this group that we have here is a beautiful bride. Jesus sees us as a beautiful bride. Isn't that great? I've probably gone too long. I've put some of you to sleep probably by now, and you're not quite with us there. We are a beauty. And today, he's looking down on us. And he's saying, that's part of my bride. And as if he's saying to the angels in heaven, if you can just take a look around the globe there, around that earth there, if you just spot that little town called Masterton in New Zealand, there's at least one group of people there. There's many groups of people there, but for our sake, he's going to look at Lighthouse and say, that's part of me, that's part of my bride. She's getting ready to come, guys, and we're ready to take her home. She's not perfect now, but come that day, she's going to be. And all you angels, you're going to look at her and you're going to be in utter amazement at her beauty. Let's join with him now and start to work on those things that we will be ready. A beautiful, radiant, glorious, attractive bride for the bridegroom. Oh, Father, the fact that we would be in this place, in this position, is just so amazing. So incredible. Why you would call us, why you persist with us, with all our frailties, with all our brokenness, and yet you come and you have grace and you pour grace upon grace upon grace, that we might become this beautiful, radiant, without spot, without blemish, pure bride. Oh God, give me grace to allow your Spirit to work on the things in my life that might be deterring and hindering that beauty. Help us as a group of believers, group of people who love you, to work together to see this beauty radiated out. And when that happens, people will see that we have this love for one another and know that we're a bride being prepared for the groom. We thank you in Jesus' name.